Thank you for joining us and welcome. My name is Jeff Tackes, and I am a senior manager of data science at Kraft Heinz. And this talk is on strategies for effective data leadership. Before we begin, given it's a virtual conference, I would like to invite you to scan the barcode and connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to connect with you outside and have spirited talks about data. A quick little something about me at Kraft Heinz. I do run a team of data scientists whose main function is improving our demand forecasting models across the globe. Every day, my team is looking for new ways to find value using data, machine learning, and analytics to drive value for our organization. What is data leadership? Data leadership is putting business value benefit on each project and focusing on what will make the most impact. This is a shift in approach where often a project will be, well, we need to clean our data because it's important for this project. Well, yes, it might be important, but how important? Why is it worth the investment in resources to clean this data? If we clean this data, what will we get as a company? Value can only be generated in three ways: cost reduction, increased revenue, and decreased risk. If what you are doing does not positively impact these three things, you're not creating value. My team focuses on demand forecasting, and we use many different data sources as features in our model. One of those data assets is customer data. Now, customer data is often not free. We often spend lots of money and have lots of agreements with our customers to provide us with some of their data. For one such use case, I was tasked with quantifying the value of the data element. I was asked, should we buy this data? Even though as a data scientist, the natural instinct is sure, more data. But putting my company hat on, I had to ask myself, does this data source add value? To try and estimate the value, we were able to get a subset of the data to test its usefulness. And after adding it to our forecasting model, we compared the forecast improvement with the new data versus our forecast without the data. And then we did some inventory simulations, ultimately backing into what improvement in accuracy and bias meant in terms of our safety stock cost reduction, increased sales, and decreased risk in service level penalties. Once those three elements were calculated, we were able to quantify the value of this new data asset. Now, in this case, we were lucky enough to actually have some sample data to test prior to making the big commitment. That's not always the case, and sometimes this quantification of value is very difficult. Sometimes wild assumptions and correlations need to be made to estimate the value. But this is one of the most important parts of any data project: quantifying the value. It is also important to monitor after the fact what value was generated by the data. After you get the data, monitor how it has impacted your business. Did it actually add value? Should you keep investing in that data or cancel and invest elsewhere? Additionally, this monitoring of the value you are creating in your organization, it adds credibility to your team. When you then go and ask for more funds or do more things with data, you will now have much more authority because you have proven to be a value creator for your business. You are able to quantify the impact the prior investments and projects have made on your business. I'm sure this all sounds like common sense, sure, to quantify the value generated, but does your organization do that consistently? A few years ago, our company had a data team that was entirely focused on data strategy. One of the functions was to acquire new data sources. I remember one investment was purchasing a huge market survey data set, and my team was involved. Part of their process was to do the first part of what I just talked about: quantifying the potential value of this data set. Now, based on that information, the team got their funding and made the purchase, stored the raw data in Snowflake, and moved on to the next project. But their work ended maybe 10% of the way in. This asset that we invested in didn't actually create any value. It was just sitting in a warehouse, never having been curated, never communicated out to the team. What are the details of this new data? And most importantly, it was never used on any value generating projects. Data leadership is key. Now, one natural question that might come next is, how does this play in with data governance and data architecture? Which one is more important? Which one do you do first? How does data leadership help these other areas? Now, maybe this is also familiar to some of you where a data governance project starts with high enthusiasm. Everyone stacks hands and says, if we do this, it'll be a tremendous value and we'll be industry leading in technology and be a leader in data and AI. Only over time, the relatively vague and non existent quantification of the value dies down. Sure, having a great MDM is important, but maybe it's not worth it right now. And maybe that's in our 5-year vision instead. This makes it easy for leadership to deprioritize and sideline these projects because the proper scoping and valuation wasn't done. So it loses the attention of the C-suite executives. When presented with how to invest $1 million on either data governance, which sure, it's important, versus a promotional campaign, which will generate $2 million in sales, which do you think is going to get approved? This is exactly why data leadership is so important. Data leadership is entirely about focusing on what to do with the data to create quantifiable value. Sadly, I've been a part of those canceled projects as well. In a prior company, we were looking to invest millions of dollars on the industry leading MDM technology because the company, frankly, wanted to brag about their digital team and technology. The company brought in many consultants. We started the process, invested a lot of money. But then after about 6 months, the project died. Why did it die? Because the team involved didn't have proper data leadership. They struggled to identify and quantify the value involved. Data leadership is the complement, it's the motivator, and it's the roadmap to data governance and architecture. James Barker came up with this house of data concept, and I really like how it ties the three pieces together. In the middle, we have data governance. It's your security, it's your privacy, your compliance, your data ops, MDM, etc. Data governance provides the rules and structure for data use. It's the execution of authority over how the data is managed. This is the what. What are we prioritizing? What's important about our data? At the bottom, as the foundation, we have data architecture. These are the models, the policies, the rules, the standards, etc., used to govern the data. This is the how. How is the data being stored? How is it being arranged? How is it being integrated? And how do we ensure data governance happens in a repeatable and scalable fashion? At the top, we have data leadership, which is the why. This is the plan to maximize the data value. What is the difference in business value with or without this data? Why are we doing this? Well, because it's creating business value. This is often missing entirely from organizations. IT functions are often not looked at as a value generator, but rather a cost center. Data science teams are often structured as cost centers in company. With the proper data leadership and quantification of value, that turns data teams into direct contributors to the profitability of an organization. We have the tools to cut cost and increase revenue. So let's talk more about how to use data leadership effectively. So we've been talking a lot about value. How do we go about that creation of value? How do we know where to focus our time and our resources? This requires a process. It's a process that involves changing the way we think and work. Everything we do, we should be asking ourselves, how do I create the biggest value possible? And then going ahead and doing that and measuring its impact. It all starts by identifying places where there are areas of improvements, then estimating the value impact of doing that thing, then targeting the most value added activities and making those improvements happen. The process starts out with measure. This involves observing and understanding the current states and then measuring a baseline. If you cannot establish a baseline, how are you going to know if you're creating value? This part can be difficult and, frankly, frustrating, especially as you are starting out trying to be more quantitative. But if we don't measure, we cannot quantify value, and then we lose momentum. The second step is hypothesize. This step involves identifying a potential action and then the range of possible outcomes. It is using a quantitative approach to the question, what should we do next? Rather than just using intuition. This step allows us to estimate the value if we take this action. Lastly, we have implement, which consists of choosing that most value generating action, delivering, and preparing for any future cycles. Now, this is a fast moving, agile type process. The idea is you start small with simple measurements and easy implementations to start building value, and then in turn, momentum. This process keeps us focused on continuously building value. We don't want to wait until that massive 2-year project is complete before we start measuring any value. Start now, start small. As we get moving, we can start to increase the size and the scope of the projects because now we have momentum. In general, data leadership has more to do with people than data. It's changing our behavior and our approach. A credit to Anthony Algman, who came up with the data leadership framework. The data leadership framework expands on the process we just talked about. It helps us measure the overall transformative impact we're having and help us correct course before we waste efforts on the wrong thing. It is a macro scale view of the data strategy. It is different than data management, whereas data management is focused on the data functions. Data leadership is focused on the outcomes. The data leadership framework is meant to help balance between the people, process, and technology. This framework tries to break down the dataverse into 5 different categories. First, we have access, which is preparing the data for use. Then we have refine. This builds data potential. Third, we have use, which is the delivery of insights. Fourth, we have impact, and that's maximizing the data value. And lastly is govern, which is scaling the results. The concept here is balance. Each category should have roughly the same maturity as the other. If we put all of our efforts into preparing the data for use, but little to no effort in using that data for insights or analytics, then did we create any value or did we just create potential for future value? The best system is one where each category is similar in strength to each other. The 5 categories are then further broken down into 4 disciplines. These disciplines do not necessarily need to all be balanced, but rather are used to help in the prioritization and allocation of time. Categories are the outcome. Disciplines are the input. So for example, to get an outcome of better insights of data, we need to put time and effort in to modeling, analytics, and integration. Another way to think about it, categories are conceptual level targets or ways the data evolves into value. It's what we use to balance the throughput of the system. Disciplines are more functional level. This is where do we direct our energy and how do we balance out the categories? This is meant to be an aid in assessing current state, setting strategy, and helping decide what is next. The data leadership framework does not provide the answers, but rather It provides us with the questions we should be asking ourselves to help dictate our next planning. This framework helps turn on the lights so that you can see into the needs of your organization and determine what efforts will give you the maximum value. For starters, breaking it down into categories like this allows us to get a glimpse into our strengths and our weaknesses. Are we too data heavy, but we lack resources in analytics to provide insights? Do we have too many data scientists, but not enough quality data for them to do what they are good at? Maybe our data is so locked down that the people who need it can't find it, or they need to go through a lengthy approval process just to use it. And then they give up halfway because by then they've moved on to the next project. Speaking from my perspective as a data scientist, I see that all the time. In fact, I had a colleague who was a data engineer once say to me, he often ignores a lot of requests that people come to him with data related questions. And then he reasons that, well, they eventually stop asking him about the data, so it must not have been that important after all. Couldn't be further from the truth. Often, because we do not have the luxury to wait around because of the fast paced environment we all live in, we typically just move on. This means we just lost data value because we could not access the data that might have provided business value. This might be an example of too much access, and that too much in the access category, but not enough refinement. If there isn't enough refinement, then the data can't be put to use. Using this framework, the first thing we need to do is assess our current situation. Using the categories and disciplines as guide, note your strengths and your weaknesses. Which areas are you very mature in, and which do we need more development? Then determine the future state. What changes need to happen to drive the most business value that are currently not being done today? Then we evaluate the gaps. Where are we? Where do we want to go? Lastly, make change happen. Focus on the disciplines in the categories that need the most help. Now, this isn't a strict framework where everything must flow in order from left to right, assess, refine, use, impact, govern. It's more suggested in general to have more capabilities to the left. Think of it like a skyscraper, and the categories are the floors. As we pack more weight into each of the floors, we need a better foundation below. So, to keep adding more weight to the upper floors, we need to build out the low levels as well. Oops, sorry. Let's spend some time to walk through an actual example of how to use this. I will focus on a demand forecasting project. It's important to call out this can be done at any level. It can be very macro or more micro. This particular example is kind of in the middle. To start out, I'm going to just start with the govern and talk about the strategy. The business defined strategy here and the way the business wants to create value is by reducing inventory waste through the improvement of forecast accuracy. Change is the organizational change or barrier that needs to be broken down, and adoption is showing and empowering the people to use data. Those are not applicable in this case. So now let's go over to access. For compliance, we have a lot of data in Snowflake tables, such as market data, customer data, transactional data, past inventory waste. Lots of data is available today. Our architecture, we use Azure ML to retrieve data and to run our modeling. We use Snowflake as our data warehouse. Data wrangling, all of our data types and metadata is already set up. No development is needed for this particular project. In Refine, we have data context. Our data dictionary is updated with information about all of our data, how the data was collected, the meaning behind it. The quality of data is good when it's available. However, we only have 6 months of history. This presents a problem as our models use several years of history. So having only 6 months of data might pose a problem. For use, our modeling has the proper data warehouse access, the tables are set up, all permissions are taken care of. Analytics and reporting are all in place with Power BI dashboards. We're tracking forecast accuracy, we're tracking inventory waste. Last, we have impact, where our data science models come in. We already use advanced machine learning models. Our simulations are already automated to help do inventory simulations. Now, reviewing this framework and kind of reviewing each category and assessing the balance, it seems like I might be heavy in the impact and access categories, but I might be missing some value in that refine step. As noted in the document, we're missing some customer data. I would then identify that as an opportunity to quantify the potential value and see if obtaining more customer data is worth the investment in resources. I could set up back tests and estimates to try to back into the value that this data would provide. This could then be prioritized amongst other opportunities that have been identified across the organization. And then the ones that generate the most value, we can then move forward with. This is obviously a relatively simplistic example, but I hope it puts context around how to use this framework to help strategize what's important and how to build your roadmap, focusing on the activities that generate value. Now, there's a lot here with these 20 disciplines, and nobody is an expert in all these areas. In fact, there are entire books written about every single one of these individual disciplines. In general, people are only masters at maybe 2 to 3 disciplines, or a master in none, but maybe competent in all. It is not required to be a master in each of these individual disciplines. So hopefully, this doesn't cause stress that in order to have good leadership, you need to achieve mastery in all 20 areas. You don't. Now, I hope this talk provides you with some tangible tools to take back to your organization to improve your data leadership and start creating value. To quickly recap, data leadership is about identifying what needs to be done to generate the most value, where value is increased revenue, decrease risk, or decrease cost. If what you are doing is not creating value, then you need to ask yourself, is it worth the effort? I would like to thank you for joining this talk on strategies for effective data leadership. Once again, I would like to connect outside the conference, so please do connect with me on LinkedIn. You can scan the barcode or look for me by name, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference talks. Take care now.